In 1947, Andy Dufresne was convicted of murdering his wife and her lover and was sentenced to life in prison. He was sent to Shawshank State Prison, a notoriously harsh prison. Andy kept claiming his innocence, but no one believed him. Red, a fellow inmate, was being interviewed for parole. He had been in prison for 20 years and was denied parole again. Red was known as the local smuggler and could get inmate anything they wanted. One night, a new inmate arrived at Shawshank. He was overweight and named Fat Ass by the other inmate. Red and his friend bet on which new inmate would have a nervous breakdown during their first night in prison. Red bet on Andy. Fat Ass did indeed have a breakdown and cried hysterically. However, the celebration was short-lived when the chief guard, Byron Hadley, swagly beat him up for not keeping quiet. Andy, on the other hand, remained steadfast and composed. The next morning, the inmate learned that Fat Ass had died in the infirmary. Andy asked about the man's name, but Haywood told him to forget about it. About a month later, Andy sought out Red, drawn by the rumors of Red's remarkable talent of finding things. Andy had a specific request in mind. He needed a rock hammer. He claimed it was crucial for his beloved hobby of rock collecting and sculpting. Intrigued, Red could not help but ask a few questions about Andy's intention, but Andy just laughed off his concern, brushing them aside with a light-hearted demur. Impressed by Andy's carefree attitude, Red agreed to help him obtain the rock hammer. However, Red felt a responsibility towards Andy's safety and decided to offer a word of caution. He warned Andy about a notorious group of prisoners known as the Sister. These prisoners were known for their sexual assault on other inmates, and their leader, Box, had developed a crush on Andy. Despite being perceived as emotionally distant by other prisoners, Red saw something special in Andy from the very beginning and felt an immediate liking towards him. Initially, Red suspected that Andy had plans to use Rockhammer for an escape in the future, but his perspective changed when he finally laid his eyes on the tool's actual size. It became clear why Andy had laughed earlier, and Red could not help but laugh along with him. In that moment, Red dismissed any lingering thought of Andy using the rock hammer to dig his way out of prison. During the initial 2 years of his imprisonment, Andy's days were consumed by toiling in the prison laundry and defending himself against the restlessness harassment of Box and the sisters. Despite his unwavering resistance and valiant effort to fend them off each time, Andy found himself subjected to regular beating and sexual assault, a dark secret he chose to keep hidden. However, a glimmer of respite appeared when news spread of a work assignment involving the tearing of one of the prison buildings. Recognizing the opportunity to provide a temporary escape from their monotonous routine, Red utilized his connection to ensure Andy and a selected few of their acquaintances were assigned to the task. The prospect of something different energized the group, offering a break from the usual hardship they endure. It was during this laborious endeavor that Andy overheard Hadley, a guard, venting his frustration about impending taxes on an upcoming inheritance. Drawing upon his vast knowledge as a former banker, Andy approached Hadley and enlightened him about a means to protect his wealth from the grasp of the IRS by converting it into a one-time gift for his wife. Hadley could evade the clutches of excessive taxation in exchange for assisting with the paperwork. Andy requested a modest favor, a few cold beer for his fellow inmate to enjoy while they worked tirelessly in the roof. Initially met with a violent threat of being thrown off the roof, Andy's persuasive reasoning and determination gradually won Hadley over. Eventually, the guard relented, fulfilling Andy's request and supplying the hard-working inmate with some respite in the form of cold beers. Observing this event, Red could not help but speculate that Andy's actions were not solely driven by desire of gain favor with the prison guard and his fellow inmate. Rather, he believed that Andy briefly wants to feel human again amidst the harsh reality of their incarcerated life. While engrossed in a movie, Andy approached Red with yet another peculiar request, this time asking for the renowned actress Rita Hayworth. Red was taken aback by this unusual demand but agreed to fulfill it. As he stepped out of the theater, Andy unexpectedly crossed paths with the menacing sisters once again. Despite the perilous situation, Andy managed to talk his way out of their clutches, but not without enduring a brutal beating that left him on the brink of death, confined to the infirmary for an agonizing month. In Box, one of the sisters faced some consequences for the violent assault as he spent a week in solitary confinement. However, his punishment was far from enough. Upon his release, Box discovers a dreadful fate awaiting him in his cell. Hadley and his cronies lay in wait, unleashing a merciless onslaught that renders Box incapable of walking or consuming solid food for the rest of his life. Subsequently, he was transferred to a prison hospital in a remote location. The sisters, having wreaked havoc upon Andy, finally moved on and ceased to trouble him any further. Upon Andy's recovery and release from the infirmary, he found a meaningful gesture awaiting him in his cell. Randy and his inmate had gathered a collection of rocks for Andy to sculpt, acknowledging his artistic talent. Additionally, a colossal poster of Rita Hayworth adorned the wall, serving as a symbol of their friendship and support. News of Andy's assistance to Hadley reached the ears of Warden Norton. Portrayed by Gunton in an unexpected turn of events, the warden conducted a surprise cell inspection, using this opportunity to access Andy's characters. Amidst the chaos caused by the guards rummaging through the cell in search of contraband, Norton discovered Andy reading his personal copy of Holy Bible. Engaging in conversation, they shared their favorite verses. Pleased with their encounter, the warden almost forgot to return the Bible to Andy. As he handed it back, Norton encouraged Andy to continue his spiritual journey, affirming that salvation lies within the sacred text. Later on, Andy received the news that he will be transferred to the prison library, where he will be working alongside the aging inmate Brooks Headland, portrayed by James Whitmore. The reason for this change became apparent when a prison guard approached Andy, seeking his financial advice. Setting up a marked site desk, Andy began providing financial guidance and assistance to not only the guards but also helped them with their income tax return. Recognizing an opportunity to improve the prison library, Andy took it upon himself to write letters every week requesting the fund from the Maine State Senate. Andy's practice of offering financial support and expertise was highly appreciated, extending beyond the wall of Shawshank. Even guards from other prisons sought his guidance when they visited for inter-prison baseball matches. Remarkable, even the warden himself entrusted Andy with preparing his tax return. Andy's skill in financial matters provided invaluable within the prison community. However, a tragic turn of event occurred when Brooks, the long-term inmate, reached his breaking point. Faced with the prospect of parole and unable to adapt to life outside the prison wall after spending half a century at Shawshank, Brooks became institutionalized. He restored to threaten Hayworth's life as a means to avoid being released. Fortunately, Andy managed to defuse the situation, using his persuasive abilities to talk Brooks down. During a conversation among friends, including Red, the sympathetic voice among them, the topic of Brooks' behavior arose. Red understood the plight of someone who had spent so much time confined within the prison confines. Brooks had become confined to the life of prisoners and was incapable of adapting to the outside world. Red expressed his insight by saying, "Those walls are funny. First of all, you hate them, then you get used to them. Enough time passes, you get so you depend on them." Despite being granted parole, Brooks was released into a halfway house. He was even given a job at a supermarket, but he despised it. Unable to cope with the challenges of life beyond the prison, Brooks tragically took his own life. Leaving behind the haunting message, Brooks was here, carved into a wooden beam. The weight of institutional lies had taken its toll. After 6 years of persistent letter writing, Andy finally received a response from the state. They grant him $200 for the library, along with a collection of old books and phonography records. Despite the state's Senate's belief that this will satisfy Andy and halt his campaign, he remains undeterred and doubling his own effort. When the donation of books and records arrives at the warden office, and he stumbles upon a copy of Mortes, The Marriage of Farago, among the records. Seizing a daring opportunity, he locks the guard assigned to the warden office in the bathroom and places the record over the prison PA system. The captivating melodies of the opera quickly envelop the entire prison, momentarily transforming everyone to a realm of freedom. Red observes that the voice of the woman in the music made them all feel liberated, if only for a fleeting moment. Outside the office, Warden Norton appeared, livid at this act of Andy. He demanded that Andy turn off the record player, but instead, Andy defiantly turned off the volume. Foaming with anger, the warden ordered Captain Hadley to forcefully enter the office. Andy's action resulted in the immediate punishment, 2 weeks of solitary confinement. When Andy emerged from his time in the hole, he shares with his friend that it was the easiest time he had ever spent there. He explained that he found solace and comfort by holding on to the Mortes Firago, which had become incarnate in his mind during the confinement, while the other prisoner expressed doubt about the likelihood of finding solace in such circumstances, and speaks of the power that hope can wield within the confines of a prison. He emphasized that hope has the ability to sustain them and keep their spirits alive. However, Red strongly disagree, believing that hope is a dangerous notion within Shawshank. He tells Andy to accept a life without hope, implying this is what's ultimately happened to Brooke. Frustrated, Red storms off, leaving the table in a state of tension and disagreement. Not long after, Red finds himself facing yet another parole hearing, realizing that he has now spent a staggering 30 years behind bars. As he goes through the motion, he could not help but use the same words he used a decade earlier, but this time devoid of any enthusiasm. Unfortunately, his parole is rejected once again. However, Andy, ever thoughtful, presents Red with a harmonica to commemorate his 3 decades in prison. In return, Red offers Andy a giant poster of Marilyn Monroe, symbolizing his 10 years of incarceration. Around 4 years after the Morjat incident, the state senate finally comes to realization they won't simply be able to brush Andy off with another check. In a change of heart, they grant him with an annual budget of $500 to expand and improve the prison library. Andy, wise in his decision making, utilizes the fund austerely. He strikes deals with books clubs and charitable organizations, leveraging their support to create the most exceptional prison library in the entire state. In a gesture of respect and remembrance, Andy names the library after Brooks, honoring the legacy of the aging inmate. With the library now expanded and enriched with a wealth of reading material, Andy takes on a new role as a mentor. He dedicates himself to guiding and assisting fellow inmates who aspire to earn their high school diploma, providing them with the opportunity to acquire the education necessary for a secure and decent job upon their release. And he recognizes the importance of education in empowering individuals and helping them forge a new path in life. Through his effort, Andy continues to instill hope and inspire those around them, proving that even with the confines of Shawshank, the power of knowledge and the desire for personal growth can thrive. In the meantime, Warden Norton cunningly exploits Andy's financial acumen for his own gain. He devises a scheme wherein he utilizes prison inmate as chief labor for public projects, successfully winning bids by undercutting other contractors, greatly seeking personal profit. Norton occasionally allows outside contractors to secure projects as long as the bribe is substantial enough to conceal and launder the ill-gotten funds, and he employs his extensive knowledge on the system and he establishes multiple bank accounts and makes various investments, all under the guises of a fictitious identity he created himself, Randall Stephens. This fictitious character exists only on paper, meticulously crafted by Andy. Through his understanding of the person's limitation and access to mail order form, Randall Stephens possesses an official birth certificate, social security number, and even a driving license. If ever an investigation were to arise regarding the scheme, the trial would lead to a man who is nothing more than a fabricated entity. Andy divulges the intricate detail to Red, remarking that he had to go to the prison to learn how to be a crook. In 1965, a young inmate named Tommy arrived at Shawshank Prison. Having been convicted of breaking and entering, Tommy possesses an easygoing nature, charming, and quickly becoming well liked among his fellow prisoners. Both Andy and Red befriend Tommy. Drawn by his amiable personality, as they get to know him better, Tommy confides in them about his history of repeated incarceration since the tender age of 13. Primarily due to his involvement in theft, recognizing Tommy's potential and aiming to steer him towards a more productive path, and he suggests that he should explore alternative career options that better suit his talent. Andy's suggestion deeply resonates with Tommy, prompting him to seek Andy's assistance in pursuing his high school equivalency diploma. With Andy's guidance and support, Tommy proves to be an intelligent student. However, when the time comes for the exam, Tommy frustrates and overwhelms him. In an act of despair, he crumples up the test and discards it in the trash. Unbeknownst to him, Andy retrieves the crumpled paper and sends it to the Tommy's behalf, determined to give him a chance. Curious about Andy's own circumstances, Tommy approached Red and inquires about Andy's case. Red takes the opportunity to explain Andy's story, dealing his conviction for the murder of his wife and her lover. Upon hearing the revelation, Tommy is visibly upset. He proceeds to share a tale for his past, recounting a former cellmate confession in another prison. The cellmate had boasted about committing the murder of his professional golfer and his lover, both of whom were associated with the country club whom he worked. The woman's husband, a banker, had been wrongfully imprisoned for those very crimes. The revelation leaves a significant impact on Tommy as he begins to grasp the possibility of Andy's innocence. This newfound understanding fuels his determination to seek justice and fight for Andy's freedom. The bond of friendship and trust depends among Andy, Red, and Tommy as they embark on the journey to uncover the truth and shed light on the injustice of the past. Armed with new information about true murderer, Andy approached Warden, brimming with hope that Norton will assist him in obtaining a new trial. With Tommy as a crucial witness, however, Andy's expectations are shattered when he realizes that Norton's reaction is the complete opposite of what he had hoped for. In a state of fury, the warden orders Andy to be confined to solitary confinement for an entire month. The inmates are astounded by the severity of the sentence, recognizing it as the longest solitary punishment they have ever heard of. It becomes increasingly clear to them that Andy may indeed be innocent, having spent nearly 2 decades in prison for a crime he did not commit. Meanwhile, Tommy receives a letter from the Board of Education, notifying him that he has successfully passed the exam and now possesses a high school diploma. The news reaches Andy through a guard, who shares the update during his time in solitary. It brings a flicker of smile to Andy's face, offering a glimmer of solace in the midst of his isolation. Later on, under the cover of night, Tommy is encountered outside for a private meeting with the warden. Warden Norton engages in a conversation with Tommy, seeking confirmation to the truth behind the story he shared with Andy. Eagerly, Tommy affirms the veracity of his account and expresses his willingness to testify on Andy's behalf. A smile forms on the warden's face, seemingly indicating his approval. However, to everyone's shock and horror, the warden nods to Captain Hadley, signaling him to execute Tommy on the spot. During a visit to Andy in solitary confinement, The warden informs him of a fabricated story, claiming that Tommy attempted to escape and was shot by Captain Hadley in the process. Andy, unconvinced by the warden accounts, defiantly asserts that everything stops and declares his refusal to continue working for Norton. In response, the warden issues a chilling threat to dismantle the library, destroy the books, and relocate Andy to a significantly harsher section of prison alongside with the most hardened criminals. Before leaving, Norton subjects Andy to another month in solitary confinement as punishment, urging him to contemplate his decision. When Andy finally emerges from solitary, he engages in a heartfelt conversation with Red, and he opens up about his beloved wife and the immense love he held for her. Despite feeling responsible for her tragic death, even though he did not pull the trigger, he shares his aspiration and dreams should he ever be freed from prison. Particularly, he desired to live in Jahuatanejo, a serene beach town on the Pacific coast of Mexico, where he envisioned managing a hotel, and he extended an invitation to Red, asking him to join him in the idyllic escape. However, Red, believing himself to be far gone, much like Brooks, declined the offer. He admonished Andy for allowing hope to toy with his mind, asserting that it will only bring destruction. As their conversation continues, Andy mentions Boxton, a town in Maine, and describes a specific hayfield with a prominent oak tree at the end of a stone wall. He implores Red to promise him that if he ever gets paroled, he will seek out that oak tree and retrieve something hidden among the stones. Red agrees to honor Andy's request but becomes increasingly concerned about his friend's state of mind. Red worries intensifies when he learns that Andy asks Haywood for a 6-foot rope, leading him to fear that Andy may have reached a breaking point and is contemplating suicide. Meanwhile, Warden Norton requests Andy to sign his shoes and take his suit for dry cleaning, retiring for the night. Andy complies, returning to his cell as the guards switch off the light. Plunging the prison into darkness, Red reflects that this night feels agonizingly long, filled with uncertainty concern for Andy's well-being. The following morning arrives, and there is no sign of Andy answering the morning call or standing in front of his cell as usual. The guard, frustrated by Andy's absence, shouts at him for making him late and cautiously approaches the cell, expecting to find Andy seriously ill or worsen. Simultaneously, Warden Norton becomes increasingly alarmed when he discovers that Andy's shoes are present in their designated box instead of his own. The situation quickly escalates as an alarm sounds, indicating the escape of a prisoner. Norton rushes to Andy's now empty cell, demanding an immediate explanation. Captain Hadley brings Red into the scene, but Red asserts his ignorance of Andy's plan. Despite Red's sincere denial, Norton's hostility and paranoia manifest in his action. In a fit of rage, he hurls Andy meticulously sculpted rocks around the cell, carelessly disregarding their significance. In a moment of sheer frustration, Norton throws one of the rocks towards Andy's poster of Raquel Welch, which now occupies the spot previously held by Marilyn Monroe, and before that by Rita Hayworth. To everyone's astonishment, the rock smashes through the poster and into the wall behind it. Realizing there is more than meets the eye, Norton forcefully tears the poster from the wall, revealing a hidden tunnel just wide enough for a person to crawl through. Through a series of flashback sequences narrated by Red, the truth behind Andy's escape plan is unveiled. Years ago, shortly after receiving his rock hammer, Andy innocently attempted to carve his name on his cell wall, only to have a significant chunk of his break away. Recognizing the unique composition of the prison wall, Andy, with his passion for geology, realized that this material could potentially be used to dig a hole if the need to escape ever arose. Andy's meticulous planning began by concealing the hole behind the large poster of Rita Hayworth. Over the course of many years, he tirelessly dug at night with his rock hammer, discreetly emptying the excavated dirt into his pocket during his morning walk into the courtyard. Tommy's tragic demise served as a turning point for Andy, signaling that the time for him to make his escape had come. Taking advantage of a thunderstorm that raged through the night, Andy cleverly wore Warden Norton's clothes beneath his own, capitalizing on the fortunate circumstance that nobody, including Red, noticed the Warden's distinctive black shoes on his feet. He packed his belongings, including important papers and Norton clothes, into a plastic bag, securing it tightly to himself with the rope he had previously requested. Through his meticulously crafted tunnel, Andy ventured into the confined space between two prison walls, eventually discovering a sewer main line. Guided by flashes of lightning, he struck the sewer line with a rock multiple times until it finally ruptured, providing him with an exit route. Crawling through the repulsive raw sewage that filled the pipe for a staggering distance of 500 yards, Andy emerged in a brook located beyond the confines of Shawshank Wall. Subsequently, a search team discovered his abandoned prison clothes and a bar of soap and a rock hammer that has been worn down by years of use. While the warden and Red are busy with the revelation of Andy's escape, Andy confidently steps into the main National Bank in Portland. Armed with his fabricated identity as Randall Stephens and armed with all the necessary documentation, he approached the bank staff to close the account tied with Warden Norton's illicit fund. With precision, he successfully concludes the transaction and walks away with a cashier check in hand. Just before leaving, he enters the bank with a package, requesting that it be promptly mailed. Unbeknownst to the bank employee, Andy embarks on a meticulously planned sequence of visits to nearly a dozen of other local banks, employing his acquired financial knowledge and utilizing the cleverness of Randall Stephen. He skillfully closed multiple accounts, ultimately accumulating a staggering sum of approximately $370,000. In the meantime, the package entrusted to the bank contains none other than Warden Norton's accounting book, meticulously documenting the corruption and illicit activities that have taken place under its watchful eye. And he accompanies the book with his written confession and detailed testimonies, explicit exposing the depth of Norton's deceit and abuse of power. The package is promptly delivered to the Portland Daily Pulse newspaper, ensuring that the truth will be unveiled to the public. Soon after, a dramatic turn of events unfolded at Shawshank Prison, as the Main State Police, accompanied by a swarm of reporters, stormed the premises. Their presence signifies the escalation of the unfolding story. Captain Hadley, responsible for Tommy's murder, is arrested by the state police and escorted away from the prison. Red recounts rumor he heard through the prison that Hadley cried like a little girl during his ride in the police squad car. Amidst the chaos, Warden Norton observes Hadley's arrest and witnesses the local district attorney, accompanied by a group of police officers, brandishing an arrest warrant, entering the prison. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Norton finally decides to open the safe in his office, which he has left untouched since Andy daring escape. However, instead of finding his cherished book, he discovers the Bible he had gifted to Andy. Inside the Bible, a note addresses the warden directly, affirming that he was indeed correct in his belief that salvation lay within. Norton proceeds to open the Bible to the Book of Exodus, only to discover that the pages has been meticulously cut out, forming the shape of Andy's rock hammer. Overwhelmed by the mounting pressure and realizing the extent to which Andy had oversmarted him, Norton walks back to his desk as the police restlessly pounded on his office door. In a moment of despair, he retrieves a small revolver and tragically takes his own life, ending his traumatized existence with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Red reflects on whether, in those final moments, the warden comprehended how Andy, seemingly against all odds, had managed to surpass and emerge victorious. Shortly after Andy's escape, Red receives a postcard from Fort Hancock, Texas, which arrives with no message written on it. Interpreting this as a signal that Andy successfully made it to Mexico and achieved his long-time desired freedom, Red's spirits are lifted momentarily However, as time passes, Red falls into a state of melancholy, overwhelmed by the absence of his dear friend. During his next parole hearing in 1967, Red engages in a candid conversation with the parole board, challenging the notion of rehabilitation as a mere construct fabricated to justify their own existence. He candidly expressed deep remorse for his past action, not because he is in prison, but because he genuinely recognizes the wrong he has committed. Red emphasizes that he must carry the weight of this regret for the rest of his life and requests that the parole board cease prolonging his confinement and leave him in peace. Finally, his parole is granted. Red ventures to live and work in the same place that Brooks once occupied, encountering the poignant message carved into a wooden beam as a reminder of his friend's tragic fate. As he travels the street, he frequently passes by a pawn shop adorned by several guns displayed in the windows. At times, a fleeting thought crosses his mind, contemplating the possibility of returning to prison, as he feels that his life outside of those walls holds no purpose. However, he recalls the promise he made to Andy, acknowledging his commitment to honoring it. In a surprising twist, Red reveals that his attention is not fixed on the guns themselves, but rather on the compasses positioned behind them. Overcoming the thought of self-destruction, Red makes the deliberate decision to purchase one of the compasses, symbolizing his choice to embrace a new direction in life. The small act serves as a testament to his resilience and determination to forget his own path, free from the chains of his past. Following Andy's instruction, Red embarks on a journey in his way to Boston, eagerly searching for the stone wall that Andy had described. True to Andy's words, Red discovers the wall adorned with a large black stone. Underneath the stone rests a small box containing a substantial sum of money, along with a note from Andy. The note instructs Red to come find him in Hayworth, though Andy purposefully refrains from naming the exact city, ensuring their meeting remained discreet. Additionally, Andy expresses his need for someone with the ability to procure items for a mysterious project he is working on. In that moment, a profound realization dawns upon Red. He comprehends the immense power of hope, feeling a surge of exhilaration as this emotion swells within him. Fueled by the strength of newfound hope, Red carves a fresh message into the wooden beam, etching the word "Brooks was here, so was Red." With his parole violated, Red decides to leave the confines of the halfway house, having little concern as he believes that authorities are unlikely to initiate an extensive manhunt for an old crook like him. Red boards a bus that take him to Fort Hancock, where he proceeds to cross the border into Mexico. Finally, after enduring trial, hardship, and decades of separation, the two friends are at last reunited on a beach along the Pacific coast, and he dreams of sharing a moment of serenity and freedom by the ocean has